You understand everything, but are unable to speak. It's a frustrating, yet very common stage in language learning. You've put in hundreds of hours, you follow conversations perfectly, you binge-watch shows without subtitles, and yet when the moment comes to speak and the question is not a super basic one, you struggle. In this video we break down why this happens to almost everyone, why speaking anxiety can be a huge factor, and more importantly, how to finally bridge that gap from understanding to speaking. And no, I won't tell you to just get out there, be social and practice. We look at lots of strategies that work even if you're not naturally outgoing. Let me start by sharing my own experience with this. I understand spoken and written Spanish at a B2 C1 level, meaning I can follow almost any conversation, even at high speeds, watch movies and read books quite comfortably. But my speaking, not that great yet. I would call myself functionally conversational in most situations, but when it comes to more complex thoughts, I do struggle. However, I'm not stressing over this, as I know that this gap between understanding and speaking is something completely natural. Think about how babies learn their first language. They understand way more than they can say for a long time. They go through what's called a silent period, absorbing the language for many months before they start speaking. And when they do start speaking, it's definitely not perfect from the start and by no means complex. But why is speaking that much harder? When you're listening or reading, your brain is doing pattern recognition, matching what you hear or see with patterns you've stored through exposure. But when you're speaking, your brain needs to form the thought you want to express while finding the right words and grammar patterns, coordinating multiple language systems simultaneously, monitoring your own output, and processing the other person's reactions. And all this in real time. The difference between understanding and speaking is like the difference between recognizing a song and being able to perform it. You might instantly know a song when you hear it, but playing it on an instrument requires coordinating multiple skills at once. That's also why you find yourself speaking better when you're discussing familiar topics. Your brain has created stronger neural pathways for these specific contexts. You can think of it a bit like knowledge and skill. I'm not 100% happy with that differentiation, but let's go with it for a bit. Understanding a language is knowledge. You've built up a mental database of words, patterns, and rules through input. But speaking is a skill. And like any skill, whether it's playing an instrument or riding a bike, it requires a different kind of practice than just acquiring knowledge. Skill is the application of your knowledge. This is actually why I built Langia with a gradual approach to output. You start with lots of tailor-made input through stories and articles for your level and interests. Then move to assisted writing, where you can mix languages, and finally to more complex output, all while reducing the cognitive load, so you can focus on one aspect at a time. But before we dive into how to develop this skill, we need to talk about what's holding most people back, including myself. Speaking anxiety. It's probably the biggest obstacle for most language learners. And it's completely normal. You're putting yourself in a vulnerable position, trying to express yourself with limited tools, potentially making mistakes in front of others. Even if you know the language well, this pressure can make your mind go blank. When asked what aspects of foreign language classes are the most anxiety-provoking, students put talking at the top of the list. And speaking has been found to be the most anxiety-provoking form of communication. Low anxiety is correlated with more success in language education, and that's what we should be aiming for. So this also common advice to just be social and to get out there, go out there, talk to natives is maybe not as productive as we are made to believe. And while I get it, I mean, the point of language is communication, to communicate with others, I actually see this differently. Not all of us are outgoing, especially not all the time. Honestly, you don't need to speak a language at all if you don't want to. If you learn Korean because all you want to do is binge K-dramas all day, that's a perfectly valid way to use the language. Listening and reading are ways of using the language. And that's why I find this distinction between knowledge and skill to be somewhat imperfect. But if you do want to speak, and let's be real, most of us eventually want to do that, we should be strategic about it. Getting to that point does not have to be about forcing yourself into uncomfortable situations. If you get a kick out of that, you can do that though. The big idea is to build confidence gradually in more secure, less vulnerable environments. I've mentioned before that my Spanish speaking abilities skyrocket when I'm drunk. And that's not just my booze altered perception, others confirm it too. Like many introverts, I become more outgoing and confident in everything, including speaking Spanish. It's not that alcohol magically improves your Spanish or your language skills in general. It's just that it reduces or removes the anxiety and self-consciousness that's holding you back. Babies are not conscious about their blabbering, they don't care at all. So the question becomes, how can we create this same confidence in, let's say, a more sustainable way? Let's start with something that to some of you may sound a little weird, but honestly, if it sounds weird to you, maybe you are weird. The idea is to talk to yourself. What I mean is narrating your day in your target language. What are you doing? What are you thinking about? What's your opinion on that show you just watched? This might feel strange at first, but think about it. It's actually the perfect low-pressure environment. No one's listening, as long as you live alone. No one's judging, and you can focus entirely on expressing your thoughts without any anxiety. This kind of self-talk can get boring quite quickly if you do the same things every day and so talk about the same things non-stop. So here's what you can do instead. After watching a show or a video on YouTube or reading a chapter of a book, discuss it with yourself. What did you think about it? Why did that character make that decision? What do you think will happen next? This way you're practicing more complex thoughts and opinions instead of just saying, I ate breakfast every day. But self-talk is just one tool in our arsenal. Let's look at some other strategies that can help bridge this gap. Another powerful strategy is reading out loud. This might sound too simple, but it's actually great for several reasons. First, you're practicing pronunciation and kind of develop muscle memory for speaking without the pressure of coming up with what to say. Second, because of that, you're developing a real feel for the natural flow and rhythm of the language in isolation. And third, you're vocalizing grammar patterns in action without having to construct them yourself. Even subvocalization, so just reading in general with your inner voice, gets you closer to output. I covered this in more detail in my video about extensive reading. What's even more useful though is writing. You should write to learn how to speak. Writing makes you very aware of what you know and what you don't know. It's less spontaneous, but therefore more reflective. You'll spot your problematic areas very easily. I actually made this point before in a completely different context. One of the main reasons I make YouTube videos is that I have to explain something that I think I know. But when I start writing the script and realize I can't really explain it, well, I guess I don't understand it that well after all. Writing exposes these knowledge gaps and gives me the opportunity to do some research on them. And now with tools like ChatGPT, writing becomes even more powerful. You can keep a record of what you wrote, hand all of that to ChatGPT and ask it to identify recurring errors or misunderstandings. It can tell you pretty clearly where your weaknesses are. If writing a diary or text about the latest TV episode you watched has too much of a barrier to get going with, you can also start much smaller, by naturally placing output in and throughout your day. Write your shopping lists, to-do lists, or quick notes in your target language. If you read something interesting, write a few sentences as a summary afterwards. The vocabulary is still fresh in your mind, so you can apply it directly. If you don't feel like writing or talking, try this new concept called thinking. I always listen to Spanish podcasts while running, but my mind tends to wander off and I start thinking about other things. What's interesting is that these thoughts often naturally form in Spanish, even when I was at a quite beginner level. They weren't grammatically perfect and had some English mixed in, but it was a form of output without opening my mouth. You can also force yourself into this thinking mode, if you need to be reminded that thinking is a good idea. Maybe set 3 reminders throughout your day that prompt you to think in your target language for a few minutes. Sure, you will switch up to your native language quite quickly, but these small little exercises really add up. This natural tendency to think in your target language becomes stronger the more input you get. I was literally dreaming in gibberish Spanish very early on when I was getting 3 hours of input every day. It depends on the topic, but, and this may come as a surprise to you, I think and write way more often in English than in my native German. I even used to make the same videos in both languages and wrote all my scripts in English first and then translated them to German, not the other way around. And the reason is simple. I consume way more English content, I'm rarely in Germany, and I don't speak German with my girlfriend. So over the last 8 years or so, English has just naturally taken over large parts of my life. And it wasn't forced, it just naturally developed in that way. It came from input and then transitioned to output. This brings us to an important point about speaking. This is controversial, but according to the input-focused linguists like Stephen Krashen, it's not even really a way to learn the language.
And this may come as a bit of a surprise to some of you. Certainly came as a surprise to me. Talking is not practicing. Talking is not practicing.
And here it makes sense to look back to the knowledge versus skill distinction. Speaking is applying what you've already learned through input. That said, speaking early can serve one important purpose, and that is to keep you motivated. If your goal is to speak to native people in their language, don't wait 2 years before opening your mouth. However, if you don't feel ready yet, stick to more controlled environments. Like language exchange apps where people expect beginners, ChatGPT's advanced voice mode, I made a whole video on this, language tutors who are trained to work with your level, language learning discords where everyone's learning, even though there you will be exposed to lots of incorrect input, maybe not ideal, or you use Lingea's writing system, which lets you practice output with instant feedback and no judgment, and allows you to turn passive vocabulary into active one through flashcards from your own context. The good part is you will naturally feel ready for more output as your input increases. You might notice yourself having thoughts in the language or even dreams. These are good signs that you're ready to start expressing yourself more. If you want to make your speaking skills a priority, build habits and make it non-negotiable. Some people go to football practice at 7 p.m. every Tuesday and Thursday. You can do the same with, for example, your italki speaking practice at these times. Don't rely on, let's see when I have time. Block it in your calendar. Now, I personally don't do that, because it sounds like an absolute nightmare to me, but that's the beauty of the different strategies. You can pick what works for you. There is no one-size-fits-all approach, whether you're an introvert who prefers writing first or an extrovert who learns best by immediately jumping into conversation. As always, the most effective method is the one you actually follow. Verb conjugations are probably one of the biggest challenges. You know, when your brain freezes trying to figure out which tense to use and how exactly the irregular conjugation worked again, I made a whole video about how to tackle verbs without losing your mind over conjugation tables. Check it out right here. Thank you for watching, and I see you next time.